She walked into his company looking for a job she wasn't qualified for. He could have turned her away, and no one would have blamed him. But one decision changed everything. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end because we'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. 3 months ago, Maria Bristol's life was ordinary in a way she did not appreciate until it was gone. She was finishing her degree. She helped her mother run a small convenience shop on the corner of Stoke Avenue. Every morning, she swept the floor, restocked shelves, and listened to her mother hum while counting change. In quiet moments, Maria imagined owning a bakery one day. A small place that is warm and honest. They were not rich, but they were stable. And that felt permanent. Then her mother got sick. At first, it was described as treatable. The doctors spoke carefully, using words that sounded hopeful. But appointments multiplied. Prescriptions grew longer. Bills arrived faster than explanations. Maria sold what she could without thinking twice. Jewelry went first. Then furniture. Then the keepsakes she had promised herself she would never touch. She told herself objects could be replaced. Her mother could not. She took every job she could find. Morning shifts at a cafe. Night shifts cleaning offices. She studied whenever exhaustion allowed. Sleep became fragmented. Meals became optional. Still, the money ran out. When the landlord sold the building, the new owners did not negotiate. They tripled the rent and gave her 3 days to leave. No extension. No sympathy. On the last night, rain slammed against the windows as Maria packed their remaining belongings into boxes that felt painfully light. Halfway through, her mother's breathing changed. An ambulance was called. Maria rode beside her, holding her hand, whispering reassurance she was no longer sure she believed. She promised everything would be fine. She promised they would figure it out. By morning, the room was silent. Her mother was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than grief. It was final. Within weeks, everything else disappeared. The shop was seized to cover unpaid debts. The apartment door was locked without warning. Hospital bills arrived like accusations, printed in black ink that did not care how hard she had tried. At 22, Maria Bristol had no home. She owned a torn backpack, a faded photograph of her mother, and a dignity she guarded carefully, because once that was gone, she knew she would not survive it. For 2 nights, she slept at a bus station. She sat upright, pretending she was waiting for a ride that never came. She kept her bag in her lap and her eyes open. When security walked past, she forced herself not to look afraid. By the 3rd day, hunger hollowed her body. Her throat burned from thirst. Her shoes were worn thin. Her legs shook after hours of walking. She went from place to place asking for work. Some people did not look at her at all. Others looked too long. Everywhere asked for documents she didn't have. Experience she could not prove. A fixed address she could not give. Once, she stood in front of a cafe window and watched people eat. She told herself she was not hungry, that she could wait. That night, she sat on a bench and counted her remaining coins. The total was not enough for a meal, not enough for transport, not enough for tomorrow. For the first time since her mother's death, Maria felt something crack inside her. Not loudly, quietly. She did not cry. She was too tired for that. She pulled her jacket tighter, even though it did not help, and stared at the street as people passed her without noticing. She realized then how easy it was to disappear, and how quickly a life could fall apart when there was no one left to catch you. Maria had not planned to stop that morning. She was already tired before the day had properly begun. Her body ached from sleeping badly, her stomach hurt from hunger she could no longer ignore, and her mind felt crowded with fear she did not know how to silence. The city moved quickly around her, people rushing past with purpose, brushing against her as though she were part of the sidewalk and not a person at all. She kept walking, telling herself she only needed one opportunity. Just one. That was when she noticed him. He stood near the curb, speaking sharply into his phone. A sleek black car waited behind him, engine humming softly. Everything about him suggested control. His posture was straight. His clothes were expensive. His presence alone seemed to bend the space around him. Still, something was wrong. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, as though he were carrying a weight that could not be seen. "I will not sign it," he said into the phone, his voice low but firm. "Not today." The call ended abruptly. He exhaled and pressed his fingers to his temple, closing his eyes briefly. Maria slowed. She did not know why she did it. She had nothing to give. No help. No solutions. But something about the way he stood reminded her of herself, of the quiet strain that came from holding everything together while feeling close to collapse. "Excuse me," she said softly. He turned her way. "You dropped this," she continued, holding out a note she had noticed near his feet. For a moment he did not react. His attention was not on the jotter, but on her. On the tired eyes. The worn jacket. The way she stood as though she expected to be dismissed. Then he took it. "Thank you," he said, his tone genuine. She nodded and stepped away immediately. "You are welcome." Before he could say anything else, she disappeared into the crowd. Davidson Jones remained where he was longer than necessary, staring at the space she had left behind, unsettled by a feeling he could not immediately explain. An hour later, Maria stood beneath the towering glass ceiling of Jones Enterprises. The building felt unreal. Too clean. Too perfect. It was a place designed for people who belonged, and she was painfully aware that she did not. She approached the reception desk, smoothing her jacket with hands that trembled despite her effort to steady them. "I am here about the job opening," she said quietly. The receptionist did not look up. "Documents?" "I do not have them yet," Maria replied carefully. The woman sighed, sharp and impatient. "We cannot proceed without proper identification and qualifications." "I can bring them," Maria said quickly. "I just need a little time." "No," the receptionist replied flatly. A security guard shifted nearby. Heat rushed to Maria's face. She nodded stiffly, turned, and walked away before the tears could fall in front of strangers. She reached the doors. Then she collided with something solid. Strong hands caught her arms before she could fall. "Easy," a voice said calmly. Her breath caught. She looked up. It was him, the man from the street. Recognition passed between them instantly. "I am so sorry," Maria said quickly, stepping back. "I was not watching where I was going." She turned to leave. "Hey, wait," he said. Her steps slowed. "What were you doing here?" he asked. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "I came to apply for a job." "For which position?" "Anything," she replied quietly. "But I do not have what they require." He studied her in silence. His assistant stepped forward. "Sir, the board is waiting." He barely acknowledged her presence. "I cannot hire you today," he said at last. Maria felt her chest tighten. "But I can offer you a trial." For a moment, relief flooded her so suddenly it almost hurt. Her lips parted, and a soft laugh escaped her before she could stop herself. "Yes," she said quickly. "Yes, of course." Then instinct struck. Who is he? Why does he have this authority? What does he gain from helping someone like me? The excitement wavered. The question slipped out before she realized she had spoken. "Why?" It was barely more than a whisper. But he heard it. Davidson stilled. Not because the question surprised him, but because it echoed the doubt already circling in his own mind. Georgina frowned. "Mr. Jones." "I know," he said quietly. He looked back at Maria, his expression thoughtfully cautious. 2 weeks, he said. "Temporary. No promises beyond that." "I understand," Maria replied, her heart pounding. He did not look convinced. "My mother believed helping people was simple," he said slowly. "She was wrong." He paused. "She paid for it." The words hung heavily between them. "If you fail," he continued, "you sure know the consequences." Maria met his gaze. "I won't. I will make good use of the chance." Something in his expression shifted. "Tomorrow," he said. 7:30. Her eyes shone. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, Georgina leaned closer and murmured, "Be careful." Maria did not know if the warning was meant for her, or for him. Maria arrived earlier than required. Much earlier. The executive floor was quiet when the elevator doors opened, the city beyond the glass walls softened by early morning light. She took her seat outside Davidson Jones's office and exhaled slowly, steadying herself. This was not comfort. It was survival. She reviewed the schedule once. Then again. Every task felt heavier when mistakes could cost more than employment. By the time the office began to fill, she was already working. People noticed. Not openly. Not kindly. Glances lingered. Conversations stopped when she passed. Eyes followed her movements, measuring rather than welcoming. A woman stopped near her desk. "You must be the new hire," she said. "Yes. My name is Maria." "Francisca. Executive Operations." Her gaze flicked briefly to Maria's screen. "You started quickly." "I was instructed to," Maria replied carefully. Francisca smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course you were." The problems began before noon. A document request that did not exist. A meeting room she was told to prepare, only to be told later she misunderstood. Corrections delivered sharply, but quietly. She absorbed every one without complaint. Then came the copier incident. "She does not even have credentials," someone murmured nearby. "And she is already positioned outside his office?" Maria did not turn around. When Davidson stepped out, the atmosphere shifted immediately. People straightened. Voices softened. "Good morning," he said evenly. "Good morning, Mr. Jones." His eyes flicked briefly to Maria's screen. "You followed protocol on the vendor file," he said calmly. The room fell still. That was correct. He did not look at Maria when he said it. He did not smile. But he did not retract it either. By midday, the whispers sharpened. Not louder. More certain. Requests began routing through her. Georgina hesitated before answering her questions. When Davidson handed her a tablet outside his office, his voice was low. "You will need temporary access to my calendar." Maria blinked. "I thought that came later." Georgina paused. "It usually does." Davidson hesitated briefly. "I know," he said, "but it is necessary." He walked away. Maria stared at the tablet in her hands, fully aware she had not asked for this attention, yet unable to refuse it. At 1:58 p.m., everything collapsed. "Maria!" She stood immediately. "Why was the board call moved?" Davidson asked, holding up his tablet. Her stomach dropped. "It was not." He turned the screen toward her. The change was logged under her credentials. The office went silent. "I did not do that," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Davidson studied her carefully. "Check again," he said evenly. Her hands shook as she reviewed the logs. The alteration was subtle, clean and intentional. "I swear," she whispered. "I did not." "I know," Davidson said quietly. The certainty in his voice struck harder than the accusation. "But intention does not remove consequences," he added. "I will fix it," Maria said quickly. "Please." He nodded once. "Do it." She stayed late. Long after the floor emptied. Long after exhaustion settled into her bones. She retraced every step until she found the manipulation and corrected it. When she stood, she noticed Davidson's office light was still on. "You can go home," he said when his door opened. "So can you," she replied before thinking. He almost smiled. "Tomorrow," he said instead. As she reached the elevator, he stopped her. "People will test you," he said quietly. "Not because you are weak, but because you are visible." "I did not ask to be," she replied softly. "I know," he said. As the elevator descended, Maria studied her reflection. She had done nothing wrong. Yet she understood now how survival could be mistaken for strategy. Above her, Davidson stood alone in his office, aware that he had not protected her, and had not stepped away either. In a place built on perception, that hesitation already had consequences. The next cracks appeared the following week. Maria felt the shift almost immediately. It was subtle at first, an uncomfortable silence when she passed Francisca's desk, a pointed comment dropped in an elevator that made her second-guess herself. But it wasn't the whispers that stung, it was the eyes. The glances. The unspoken judgments that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched every minute. It wasn't until 2 p.m. that things truly escalated. Maria was at her desk, organizing Davidson's incoming requests, when Francisca walked past, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. "You're still here," Francisca said, her voice sweet but dripping with something harder underneath. "I thought you'd be heading home after the CEO made his rounds." He has a way of making people feel seen, doesn't he? Maria didn't answer at first, her fingers tightening around the pen she was holding. She could feel Francisca's gaze on her, heavy and probing. "What do you mean?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral, though the question burned her throat. Francisca smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, nothing. Just noticing how you're always right there when he needs you. Interesting, isn't it? You barely even know how to work the system, but somehow you're always front and center when something goes wrong." Maria froze. She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell Francisca that it wasn't true. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and she could hear the low murmur of the office, the way it shifted when Davidson passed by her desk. "Anyway," Francisca continued, leaning in just a little too close, "you'll need more than your good intentions if you plan to stick around here." She straightened up, the smile never leaving her face as she turned away. Maria's stomach churned, but she forced herself to keep her eyes on the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but nothing came out. The words didn't make sense anymore. The next day, the tension was unbearable. Maria had been organizing Davidson's schedule, going over documents when the door to his office opened. He stepped out as composed as ever, but this time something felt different. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, and then he looked away too quickly. "Maria," he said, his tone almost too even. "I need the board presentation prepared by 4 p.m. Can you handle it?" "Of course," she replied, trying to match his calm. "It will be done." His gaze lingered for just a moment longer before he nodded and walked back into his office. Maria shook her head, trying to focus, but the unease that had been building inside her all week intensified. It wasn't just Francisca now. It was everyone. By the time the clock ticked closer to 4 p.m., Maria had finished the presentation, only to find herself intercepted by another coworker on the way to Davidson's office. "You're really taking all this on yourself?" another voice asked. "Do you think he'll appreciate it when you mess something up?" Maria didn't recognize the man. His sharp suit and dismissive tone made him feel as though he were a permanent fixture, someone who belonged here and wasn't afraid to remind everyone. "Excuse me?" Maria said, her voice just a little too loud. "You heard me," he smirked. "You're not the first person who's tried to get his attention. But those who last here know their place. You don't seem to be doing a very good job of that." The words hit her like a slap, and for a moment, she just stood there, stunned. But before she could answer, the man had already walked away. Davidson called her in just as the clock hit 4. She stood in front of his desk, the weight of the presentation slides still in her hands, but now it felt heavy with something else. Guilt. Confusion. Fear. "Everything good, Maria?" Davidson asked, his voice quieter than usual but still firm. "Yes," she answered, trying to keep the tremble from her hands. "The presentation is ready. Here." She handed him the folder, and for a moment, their fingers brushed. A small, innocuous gesture. But in the silence that followed, it felt loud. Davidson's gaze lingered on her face for just a second, and then he returned his attention to the folder, flipping through the pages. "You did well," he said simply, handing the folder back. "I want this presented to the board in an hour. Can you handle that?" "Of course." But as she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. He wasn't being harsh, but his words were carefully neutral, as if testing the waters to see how much he could rely on her. She closed the door behind her, feeling something heavy settle in her chest. Later that evening, after the presentation went smoothly and the board had dispersed, Maria lingered by the coffee machine, trying to calm her shaking hands. She had done it. She had made it through the day. But something still wasn't right. She stepped out into the hall, only to freeze at the sound of raised voices. "Davidson's. Are you really going to stand there and let this happen?" His tone was low but furious, barely contained. Maria took a few steps closer, trying not to be noticed, but she couldn't help overhearing the conversation. "I didn't sign up for this," Davidson's voice continued, more strained now. "You don't get to come back into my life after 10 years and demand control. I've built this on my own, and I won't let you tear it down because of your ego." Maria hesitated. Who was he talking to? Her eyes darted across the hallway to see Davidson standing in the middle of his office, the door ajar. Across from him, a tall figure stood. The man looked familiar, someone she'd seen in the building before, though she hadn't spoken to him. His presence felt commanding. "Davidson," the man said, his voice cold, "you think you can run this place without me? You wouldn't even have it if it wasn't for me." Davidson's jaw tightened. "I don't owe you anything," he snapped. "You left. You forfeited everything. Now, I'm in control. Don't come back and try to manipulate me with guilt." Maria felt a pang of guilt herself. She didn't know what had been going on, but the tension between them was palpable. The man scoffed, eyes narrowing. "This won't end well," he said, before turning sharply and storming out of the office. As the door clicked shut, Davidson turned and caught Maria standing in the hallway. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She was only trying to get back to her desk. Davidson's face softened for a split second before he quickly masked it with a more distant expression. "Maria," he said, his voice measured, "are you okay?" Her mouth went dry. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just heading back to my desk." Davidson nodded slowly, but his gaze held hers a moment too long. The air between them was thick with something unspoken. "You don't need to worry about that," he said, his voice softer now. "It's nothing." She wasn't sure what to say, but she nodded, turning quickly to leave, heart pounding in her chest. By the time she reached her desk, Maria felt the weight of everything settle on her. The accusations, the whispers, the tension in the air. Was Davidson really helping her? Or was there something more? She sat down at her desk, her thoughts a swirling mess of doubts and confusion. Everything that had felt like a step forward, her work, her place here, her connection with Davidson, now felt uncertain and tainted. It was all too easy to question. And when the accusation started, she wasn't sure who she could trust anymore. The email arrived at 8:07 a.m. Maria saw it before she even sat down. White screen. Black letters. Her name in bold. Internal review. Conference room C. Her fingers hovered over the mouse. The office hummed around her, keyboards clicking, low voices, the faint whir of the air conditioner, but it felt distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. She reread the message. Twice. Her chest tightened. She hadn't done anything wrong. Still, when she stood, her knees felt weak. Conference room C smelled faintly of coffee and polish. 3 people sat on one side of the table. A woman from HR she'd seen once in passing. A man with wire-rimmed glasses flipping through a file. Another woman, younger, typing quietly on a tablet. They didn't ask her to sit. "Ms. Bristol," the HR director said at last, folding her hands. "This is a routine conversation." Routine didn't feel like the right word. Maria lowered herself into the chair anyway, smoothing her skirt with fingers that wouldn't quite stop shaking. "We've received concerns," the man with the glasses said without looking up. Maria's stomach dropped. "Concerns about?" Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Perception," the HR director said. "Of preferential treatment." The room went very still. "Preferential," Maria stopped. Started again. "I don't understand." The tablet clicked. The younger woman slid it across the table. Dates. Notes. Bullet points. Hired without full documentation. Emergency housing authorization. Direct reporting to the CEO. Unscheduled access. Maria stared at the screen until the words blurred. "I didn't ask for any of that," she said quickly. "I was just grateful. I work hard. I do what I'm told." "We're not questioning your effort," the HR director replied. "But boundaries matter. Especially at this level." Maria's fingers curled into her palms. "Does Mr. Jones know about this?" she asked. The pause. Too long. "He was informed after the report was filed," the man said. "He's been advised not to interfere." Something inside her chest cracked, quiet and sharp. She nodded. Because if she spoke again, she wasn't sure what would come out. The days that followed were worse than the meeting. Davidson didn't avoid her. He erased her. Instructions came through email. Schedules rerouted through Georgina. Conversations reduced to clipped acknowledgments that never quite reached his eyes. When he passed her desk, he didn't slow. When their gazes met, it lasted half a second too short. At night, in the apartment that still smelled faintly of new paint and unfamiliar comfort, Maria lay awake staring at the ceiling. She replayed every moment. The way he'd steadied her hand during training. The way he'd stepped between her and his father. The warmth that had lived in his voice, and then vanished. Maybe I mattered, she thought. Until I became a liability. On the fourth day, the whispers stopped. No glances. No tension. That silence frightened her more than anything else. At 5:42 p.m., Georgina appeared beside her desk. "Maria," she said softly. "He wants to see you." The walk to his office felt longer than usual. When she stepped inside, Davidson stood with his back to her, looking out at the city. His jacket was still on. His shoulders rigid. He didn't turn right away. "They've concluded the review," he said. Her heart thudded. "And? No violations," he continued. "No misconduct." Relief flared, brief, fragile. "But they've recommended reassignment." The words hollowed her out. "You'll move to operations support," he said. "Different floor. Different team." Maria swallowed. "And you?" she asked quietly. Davidson finally turned. "You won't report to me anymore." There was final. "I understand," she said, though her voice trembled. "If that's what's best." His jaw tightened. "This isn't about what's best," he said sharply, then stopped. Exhaled. "I should have handled things differently." Maria looked at him. "You didn't explain anything," she said. "You just pulled away." "I was trying to protect you." Her laugh came out small, broken. It didn't feel like protection. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything neither of them had said. "I'll clear my desk," she whispered. She turned to leave. "Maria." She paused but didn't turn around. "This isn't the end," Davidson said. Her fingers curled around the doorframe. "It feels like it," she replied. And she walked out. Her new desk was tucked between filing cabinets and a blank wall. No window. No nameplate. No Davidson. She sat there long after the office emptied, staring at the screen without seeing it. For the first time since she'd walked into Jones Enterprises soaked and desperate, she wondered if staying had been a mistake. That night, Davidson stood alone in his office. The city glittered beyond the glass, distant and indifferent. He had protected the company. Protected control. Protected her, on paper. And still, he had watched her walk away with hurt in her eyes. For the first time in years, Davidson Jones admitted something he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Power could silence threats. Money could clean messes. But fear. Fear had just cost him the one thing he hadn't known he needed until it was slipping through his fingers. The operations floor felt nothing like the executive level Maria had come from. There were no glass walls or hushed conversations. Instead, the space was loud and constantly moving. Phones rang nonstop, printers hummed, and people spoke over one another as deadlines piled up without mercy. Here, no one cared how Maria Bristol had entered Jones Enterprises. They did not whisper about favoritism or glance at her with suspicion. They cared only about one thing: whether she could do the work. During her first week, she made mistakes. They were not catastrophic mistakes, but they were noticeable. She misfiled reports, misunderstood a workflow, and once forgot to attach an important document to an internal request. Each mistake earned her correction, but not kindness. No one softened their tone or reassured her. Surprisingly, that made her feel stronger. She stayed late every night. She asked questions when she did not understand something and wrote everything down. When she made an error, she fixed it and made sure it did not happen again. By the end of the second week, her coworkers stopped watching her so closely. By the fourth week, they began depending on her. The moment she realized she was no longer invisible came late one night when a department manager placed a thick stack of reports on her desk and said, "You're good with numbers. Tell me what feels wrong here." Maria worked through the night. By morning, she had discovered irregular payment patterns that no one else had noticed. While Maria was building her place quietly, Davidson noticed the change from a distance. Reports from operations became cleaner and faster. Problems that usually reached his desk disappeared before he even heard about them. When he reviewed internal summaries, he began to see Maria's name appear again and again, always attached to solutions rather than questions. He never contacted her. Every instinct told him to, but he resisted. He told himself that staying away was the only way to protect her and to prove that her success was her own. Still, watching her rise without him stirred something deep inside his chest. It was not jealousy, but a painful mix of pride and regret. The real crisis struck without warning. What began as a routine audit request quickly escalated into an emergency board meeting. Davidson stood at the head of the conference table as financial reports were passed around. At first glance, the numbers looked normal, but something was wrong. Small amounts of money had been moved across multiple departments. The transactions were subtle, spread out, and deliberately designed to avoid detection. However, the pattern was too precise to be accidental. "This indicates someone with internal access," one board member said cautiously. Davidson did not respond because he already knew. His father's name did not appear anywhere in the records, but Davidson recognized the method immediately. It was the same strategy his father had once used to control the company without leaving fingerprints. Maria discovered the issue late at night. She had stayed behind to finish reconciling reports and noticed repeated vendor names that did not match previous records. When she traced the transactions, the same shell accounts appeared again and again. Her stomach tightened. This was not a mistake. Someone had planned it carefully. She documented everything clearly and professionally. She avoided emotional language and focused only on facts, timelines, and patterns. At the end of the report, she hesitated before adding a final observation. The payment behavior matched access permissions that only long-standing executive accounts would have. She sent the report directly to compliance. She did not send it to Davidson. The response was immediate. Legal teams were summoned. Security protocols were activated. Several internal systems were temporarily locked down as investigators traced the source of the breach. Eventually, Davidson's father was forced to appear before the board. The confrontation between father and son happened behind closed doors, but the tension echoed through the building. "You think you have outgrown me," his father sneered. "You would not even be sitting in that chair if it were not for me. You lost the right to that claim when you abandoned this company," Davidson replied coldly. "You tried to manipulate it from the shadows and you failed." His father laughed bitterly. "You would never have seen it if your little assistant had not caught it." Davidson's expression hardened. "She is not my assistant anymore, and she protected this company from you." The room fell silent. His father's smile faded. "She chose independence over loyalty to you," he said. "That must hurt." It did. Maria learned what had happened the following morning. She was called into conference room A, where several board members waited. They thanked her for her diligence and acknowledged that her report had prevented a public scandal that could have damaged the company permanently. "You acted with integrity and discretion," the board chair told her. "For that reason, we would like to offer you a permanent position in strategic operations." The promotion came with authority, stability, and recognition. It also came without Davidson. Maria accepted without hesitation. That evening, as she left the building, she saw Davidson waiting near the entrance. Not in his office. Not behind security doors. Just standing there. "I heard what you did," he said. Maria nodded. "I did not plan for it to unfold this way. I am glad you trusted yourself instead of coming to me," Davidson replied honestly. "That tells me you no longer need my protection." She studied his face. "This is the moment where you ask me to stay?" He shook his head. "No. This is the moment where I respect who you are becoming." She felt her chest tighten. "Then what happens now?" Davidson met her gaze steadily. We grow separately until we can stand together without fear or imbalance. Maria smiled softly. That sounds fair. By the time 3 months passed, Maria's life had settled into something solid. She had a permanent role in strategic operations, a modest apartment she paid for herself, and a routine that no longer felt like survival. At work, she was respected. Outside of it, she was calm. Davidson Jones remained distant. They crossed paths often, exchanged professional greetings, and nothing more. Maria assumed that was how things were meant to remain. Then his email arrived. It was short, direct, unmistakable. Maria, I would like you to attend the company's charity gala this Saturday as my official partner. She read it twice. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was caution. Men like Davidson did not make casual invitations, and she refused to read meaning where none existed. After a long pause, she replied, I will attend. Davidson waited for her at the entrance. Not inside. Not surrounded by people. Waiting. You came, he said. I said I would, Maria replied, steady but alert. He offered his arm. She hesitated, then took it. Inside the ballroom, eyes followed them. Davidson introduced her deliberately. This is Maria Bristol, he said. She works in strategic operations. Each time he spoke her name, he anchored her presence. When the noise grew heavy, he guided her onto the balcony. I asked you here because I needed to be honest, Davidson said. Her heart tightened. I respect the distance between us, he continued. That is why I waited. But pretending I feel nothing is no longer fair to you. Maria searched his face, unsure what to say. I admire you, he said simply. Not for what you overcame, but for who you became when no one was watching. She did not expect that. I am not asking for anything, Davidson added. I only wanted you to know how I feel about you. Silence stretched between them. I never assumed you felt this way, Maria said finally. I thought you were only being kind. I was, he replied. And I was also falling for you. The words landed softly, but they stayed. I don't know what I feel yet, Maria admitted. I never allowed myself to consider it. That is enough, Davidson said. I can wait. Back inside, Davidson took the stage for closing remarks. Tonight's success belongs to people who work quietly behind the scenes, he said. Including Maria, whose integrity protected this company. The room applauded. Maria stood frozen, overwhelmed. This was not romance. This was courage. Later, outside under the night sky, Davidson walked her to her car. Thank you for trusting me with the truth, she said. Thank you for not walking away, he replied. As Maria drove off, her thoughts raced. For the first time, she was not wondering whether she belonged in Davidson's world. She was wondering whether, one day, she might choose him. And Davidson watched her leave, knowing he had done the one thing that mattered. He had spoken honestly. Whatever came next would be real. And this is where their story pauses. Not with a promise. Not with a kiss that fixes everything. But with a choice still waiting to be made. If you were in Maria's place, would you walk away to protect your independence? Or take the risk of choosing someone who finally chose you honestly? Tell me in the comments what you would do. Please, do not forget to like the video, it really helps the channel grow. And if you enjoy slow burn romance stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because some love stories don't begin with falling in love. They begin with the courage to speak the truth.